And for that, we are going to have Tiago Tavares, CEO of SaferNet, as the moderator. The professor of the University of São Paulo and columnist of Folha de São Paulo newspaper, Pablo Telado. The researcher from the State University of Rio de Janeiro, Diego Machado. The Facebook Public Policies Director, Mônica Rosina. And within minutes, we are going to have Google Brazil Public Policies and Government Affairs. So first, we are going to start with Tiago Tavares. Well, good morning once again, everyone. I would like to thank each one of you that thanked to take part in this panel. And the challenge we have is to seek solutions and to have a more positive network based on the scenario. Misinformation, that also shows a more hostile environment. And we have a complex answer here. I remember last year, I had the opportunity of taking part in meetings of the Consultative Committee on Internet and Elections created by the Supreme Electoral Court to think of strategies to curb the advance of misinformation online and fake news. And there were several proposals, several ideas, several initiatives, and the greatest challenge, Alexandre, is that most of them would hurt some fundamental right, violation to privacy, fundamental freedom. So there was some kind of a side effect. So these are complex issues with complex answers. And the whole world is thinking about how we can get to the best answers to this issue. So, Juliana, you're most welcome. So this is my first question, and also I would like to remind some other aspect. The National Congress just started activities this week, and it proposed 30 bills last year trying to address somehow the phenomenon of misinformation and fake news. I remember of a study of the steering committee. I think Diego and Bruno are here. Realized that out of 30 projects, most have a criminal bias, that is, criminalize the spreading of fake news until 8 years of penalty, as if it was possible, really, to approach that. So, based on this framework and data that we have, I would like to start with you, Pablo. You have been researching that deeply. You have been publishing papers, articles. You have been extremely active and engaged in the discussion. So what is the balance that you have, and what is the lessons learned from the experience of 2018, especially in the context of elections, and in which misinformation was broadly used even as a political strategy? What can you say about that? Well, first of all, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. This topic of misinformation and fake news is hard to address. First, because it's hard to be defined. The concept of fake news was born first in the academy, and then it was broadened to the political and news arena. This topic was indeed the opposite. It started with the political coverage of 2016 to address these bloggers that were bringing misinformation about Hillary Clinton. And then it was used by the Democrats to talk about Donald Trump, and then Donald Trump started to using it to disqualify the journalists that were against them. So it started with blogs, and then to CNN, and then to New York Times. So a very broad term. There was an academic effort to try to define the issue. There is a lot of literature on it today. But fake news include journalistic errors, sensationalist headlines, news information outside context, exaggerations, and also malicious content. So what is fake news? Is it just malicious intent? Do I know the intent of the person? So it's very difficult to describe the phenomenon. But if you try to understand the phenomena as a whole, it is very difficult to find websites that have the purpose to misinform society. What we have are sites that are engaged in political processes and that they use news to talk about the political perspective. This is the phenomenon that we saw when we investigate Facebook pages and Twitter accounts. So when you're talking about fake news, you're talking about one piece of news about these people. But when we go to the people, they are not producing lies. They are using political bias to produce news. So basically, fake news sites get what happened on the day and translate the news into the perspective of this political bias, according to their political view. And with that is that they have sensationalistic headlines, they increase, they diminish information, but it is not a pure lie. And that's why it is very difficult to approach it. It uses a piece of news, of true news. First, because this brings more credibility to information. So they are emulating news telling without telling news. They have serious names, the I don't know what Post, the I don't know what Chronicle. They use the newspaper format, so they have headlines, they have highlights, but generally it is not purely invention. It is something that is adapted from the real news to serve a political bias. And the bias can be conservative, can be liberal, whatever current that is using that. And they are doing that to feed opinion trends. The fact of having very heavy headlines, to be very strict in feeding news, has a twofold purpose. First, to feed information to their militants, but also to spread information in the social media. Remember, the social media is not like mass media, like TV, like radios, where you have a one-to-many ratio. So you have one place that centralizes the broadcasting and others that are passive, receive the information. In the social media, you post the information, so you seed the information. You generally have a website that is connected to a militant page. This page seeds the network. It has like 1 million followers, and it seeds the information, and it is the users that spread the information. We estimate that there are 10 to 15% of users that are active to spread content. And they spread content because they share the political opinions, and they pass them on. Because this information was designed to be passed on, they are strong pieces of information, they are sensationalistic, and they raise feelings that make you press the button and share them. They generally generate fear, enthusiasm, indignation. So strong content that appeal to your political stand, and people who share this political stand say, look at what these people are doing. Oh, I have to share that. And they pass on the information. And it's very difficult to contain this information because it appeals to strong feelings, it spreads fast, and then, you know, when you are going to challenge the information, you don't have the same feelings to be shared. It does not have appeal to be spread in the social media. And just to close, I think part of this problem has a solution, thinking of platforms changing algorithms. They have to privilege the reach of these not so emotional news. They don't have the appeal of the feelings of anger, fear, indignation. And to my view, platforms have to change algorithms to have a better political balance, because it's completely unbalanced. You see, the media has a very good performance. Folha de São Paulo, Estado de São Paulo, G1, the large media have good performance, but they have good performance in headlines that also appeal to emotions. It's not what we call the cold articles, the informative echoes. They are those that appeal to feelings. And I don't think it's the solution to the problem, but I think that a good remedy works with expanding those, what I call cold articles. And I think that, of course, media literacy is important. People have to understand how the communication process works. But I don't think it's a matter of lack of understanding. We know that people that are spreading content are more educated. They are older. Younger people have a healthier use of the media than older people. So I don't think it's a lack of information. It is a political problem that we have to solve politically. It's very complicated. Media literacy can help, but I don't think it doesn't help as much as we think it helps. I think that working with algorithms can also work, but the bad news is that we have a huge challenge, and the solution is political. As society, we have to learn how to work better with diversity. Our society is polarized, and we are generating a feeling that we do not see the legitimacy of the opponent, and we are using very bad sources that appeal to indignation, to fear, and while we don't settle this issue, I think all solutions are going to, I don't know, dry ice. Thank you, Pablo. Pablo coordinates at the University of São Paulo a laboratory to monitor the political debate. And of course, you focus on misinformation, politically speaking. But misinformation is also a strategy for other areas. In the health area, for instance, against vaccine and public security, and it's a huge challenge. So, Monica, Facebook was on the spotlights for a large part of last year. It is the country's largest social media, the largest app for the sending of messages, sharing of pictures, and you worked very hard to detect and remove fake accounts, unsuitable behavior. You were engaged in initiatives to fact check, media literacy. Do you agree with Pablo that even in face of all this effort, the feeling is that we are still drying ice? Well, thank you, Tiago, first for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here to talk on behalf of Facebook for the audience. I would like to thank you for inserting the topic on the Safe Internet Day. So I think it is very necessary that we bring the debate to a day like today. And I'm going to thank you for the provocation because it talks a bit of how I'm going to structure my line. I've been with Facebook for a bit more than 2 years, and I have been working a lot. It has been one of the focus of my work. And the company is highly committed against fake news. The elections of 2016 in the United States took everyone by surprise, our company included. And from there on, we have been investing people, money, resources to try and create programs and initiatives to counterattack. I think Pablo says something important. This is a political issue. The platform cannot solve it alone, but we have an important role here. And I would like to tell you a bit about how we have been facing these issues. I'm going to divide my talk in two parts. I'm going to talk about three major areas we have been working with in fighting fake news. I'm going to talk about what we are doing to bring more context and information to our users, and I'm going to talk about how we work to address fake news. And then I'm going to talk about two initiatives that we've recently announced that I believe are going to be quite complementary to our agenda. And trying to answer your question, Tiago, we indeed believe that the efforts we have been engaging have been helping to significantly reduce in our platform the reach of fake news. We have been seeing very positive results. It is a small part of the problem. I agree with Pablo that there is a greater problem there, but we as society have a lot of work ahead of us. Just to talk about our actions, I'm going to start with the first action that we have been investing lots of resources, which is the removal of fake news or fake accounts or accounts that violate our policy. It may not seem so, but we have internal data that shows us that the large volume of misinformation that we see in the platform come from fake accounts. It is the main outlet of vehiculation of fake news, and we have been investing a lot in reducing these accounts. We have data that is released on a quarterly basis, and in the last transparency reports, they are quarterly, so in the last 6 months, on average, Facebook removed from 6 to 7 million accounts a day. These are accounts that do not stay seconds in the platform because we are able to detect these people before they cause any damage. So there is a lot of background work to avoid these people to be there, these players to be there. And we have been working a lot to remove accounts or profiles that violate our policies. Pablo mentioned ways through which some pages try to deceive people. Generally, these pages violate our policies, policies of authenticity, for instance. And we have been working very hard to remove pages or profiles that are not fake, but that are associated to this type of behavior. I'll give you a concrete example. Sometimes a page starts as a meme page, which generally is very successful. Then they get a large number of likes and followers, and then they are transformed into an anti-vaccine page. So today we have tools to avoid change of names to happen. For instance, a page of memes, if it wants to become an anti-vaccine page, it won't be able to do that. We have a history of the changes of names that is clear to all users, but it is just an example of how people with evil intent can generate misinformation. And the second pillar is how we can inform better our users. Fernanda, in her opening line, talked about education and information, how important it is for people to understand what are the reliable sources. And I think part of our work is to help people make informed decisions. So we invested a lot last year on marketing campaigns. Alexander brought data from CETIC showing TVs, radios, magazine, newspapers are still a very important source of information for people, reliable information. Our marketing campaign with tips on how to identify fake news run in our platform on the web and also in the main communication media, newspapers and magazines in Brazil. And we are also thinking about products. I don't know if you had the opportunity to pay attention to that, but when you see a piece of news shared on your news feed, today there is a little E. And that E, if you click on that, I'm sorry, there is an I. And that I, when you click on it, you know what is the outlet that first produced the news, what friends shared the link. So that brings more context, more information to our users. And transparency of pages, ads, is growing. We have been investing a lot on this last year. I don't have the time to talk about transparency on ads, but we focused on the election last year. And if you have any questions, please just ask them about that.
And in our third pillar, the idea is to reduce meaningfully distribution not only of fake news, but content with non-authenticity. Like the clickbait, we work strongly to mitigate the reach of fake news and headlines in our platform. Thanks to a huge team of people who work throughout artificial intelligence to identify clickbaits and spam, that is not present significantly in the platform, but still there is a huge investment to decrease that problem. And thanks to some partnerships with check-in agencies such as Lupa, Fatus, and EFP to check fake news link. More recently, a page of huge reach in Brazil, which I do not recall the name right now, but anyhow, they shared a fake news. They heard that piece of news was fake, as that had been checked by one of our partners, and right afterwards they posted saying, well, we apologize, we did not know that was a matter of fake news. We just heard, we were told about that, so please accept our apologies. That is a very reliable page, and it happens. Sometimes you share fake news not on purpose. So the idea is to have partners to verify business and news, people that work jointly, so we can get to learn about fake news as quick as possible. If a page is supposed to be advertising a fake news, that will decrease your page access, and users will consider few times before sharing that. Much has been invested on education. Together with some other companies, we have the so-called Comprova project. That is a news verification consortiums. There is another project known as Vaza Falciani. That is a online course. I do recommend it, especially to young people. And then it's nice to have statistics here with videos, memes, online tests to teach people that this is indeed a problem. There is novelties. I cannot spoil that yet, but thanks to Lupa and Vosfatus, we created a dialogue with the users to help them to identify online fake news. I am about to close. I apologize for exceeding my time, but briefly let me address two other important initiatives where 22% of children and adolescents, they search for information about their community, streets, neighborhoods, and we are strongly investing on local news. Last week, we had announced a 300 million US dollars investment for the next 3 years to allocate and leverage local news. And it's our responsibility as a platform to support and to help local news to gain more strength within the platform. The place is so key to allocate and leverage information. And there are there is a bunch of information not only in Brazil but abroad. We see that as a huge opportunity for investment. We had just started new initiatives in the U.S., but soon you will break through the news. This is another project where I'm fully involved. That is not highly concerned about misinformation, but they talk one to another. Last week, we announced the creation of a business committee. I apologize for my screen being in English, but that's fresh news. And the idea is that Facebook is not the only one to reach decisions about the content which traffics in our platform. We understand that is our liability to share that with experts. And with that in mind, we had just created a committee that will oversight Facebook decisions that will feed our own platform policies. And the idea is that this board or commission or committee will be fully independent and to be able to come up to different conclusions or decisions as how Facebook deals in our platform. We not only get things right, we make mistakes as well. And then we hope that this board can help us to get things properly done with more local context to help us to better understand how can we develop our policies and how can we pass that in our platform. I am at your disposal if you'd like to talk furthermore about that later on. Thank you, Tiago.
Obrigado, Mônica. E um lugar extremamente.
Well, that's very timely for my next announcement. Well, for the past 23 years, our committee discussed about internet models to address complex issues like that. When you talk about a desert of news, let me open a talk here with Juliana. Google, 8 years ago, bet that they could support or enhance local production, and you started some efforts about that. Considering your experience and new elections, we have elections every single day, right? We have one in Nigeria. We have another one in the European Parliament next April. Indians elections next May. We have elections in Indonesia, which is another country with a high rate of population. But in Brazil, we have elections every 2 years. Minister Rosa Weber last week announced her concern about getting organized municipal elections for next year. And how is Google getting prepared in face of this scenario, considering your past experience with Google News Lab and all other initiatives? Thanks for your questions. I am Juliana from Google, and it's such a privilege to be here. I have worked for CGI before, and I'm so touched and emotional to talk here in this place that used to be my house. It's a privilege indeed. Your question addresses some other issues that we have to raise here in terms of elections perspective and misinformation. We have two ideas. It's the misinformation or disinformation is somewhat what I do in public policies. And we have two looks. First, an internal one about what we do, our policies, and second, how do we work in a multi-sectorial aspect to get content from authorities and officials so voters they can get informed decision, and how we work with the journalism to emphasize it. As to internal job, and what impresses me quite a lot, every single day, 15% of all searches at Google, they are new searches. So there is a huge inventory of curiosity in the world. Every time we talk about how to deal with that perspective of information and information rank, we have to give scalable answers. Out of 15% of new searches daily, it's impossible to have all human answers to be fast and effective. So today at Google, Search happens organically, and several signals that are ready to deliver that information. However, we have people, they do not touch the algorithm, but they assess the searcher delivery. If you type cat and then you get as a result dog, it means that that search does not work. And those appraisers, they help with that. It's a very complex process and highly studied. So appraisers, they will see if a website is of quality, authority, and several other signs that are taken into account by our appraisers. More recently, we included in the guide fake news. There is even an example, and I do recommend if you want to know how the Google search works, there is a website, How Does the Search Works? When you type a word that has several meanings, how can you get a result about that meaning? So evaluators, they help Google to improve search and results. They are maybe surveyors, let's say. Users, that information helps us to work with those people that are acting maliciously. We have a policy for Google announcers where we remove those sites that want to get reimbursed by fake news sharing. And we have also YouTube policies against spam. More recently, we released a transparency report showing how Google applies community guidelines in its platform, how much of that was removed by content, reliable evaluators. I will not get into detail about that because I have some other points to cover. In our public policies team, we try to reflect about elections, and we are reflecting about municipal elections as well. And what bothered us was that in our organic search, delivering a result which is fully defined by the algorithm, how can we put that into context, considering an election perspective? And thanks to a knowledge panel feature, and that was a record that has never been done before. 8,500 knowledge panels with main data at all levels, deputies, senators, with public information about them. For those patients running for those running for presidents, we set main priorities, and they also use the post on Google too, where they could communicate it to their voters throughout the knowledge panel. That is that somewhat will highlight information which candidates and campaigns were offering before. Also during elections, we had a hub with information where you could filter by region, by gender, by political party. We worked together with the court, where our aim is to make that information useful to our users and to collaborate that users they can get informed decision during the election journey. Another quite interesting action was where to vote, how to vote, and elections results. We worked with TSC, which is the Tribunal Federal Court. I forgot my certificate, so you would know where to vote, integrated with Google Maps to find your way around, and results you could follow in real time thanks to the election Supreme Court highlighting which official information they were shared during elections. One last action was the Google Assistant. I don't know if you used it before or not, where we created an experience with the TSE where you were able to talk with them during elections. That is a huge perspective where they included in their experience voting lies. If over 50% of the voters, they annulate their vote, what's going to happen? I mean, it was like general information that started 1 year before, and we might keep doing that in partnership with the election court. So this is what we do in terms of products, policies, transparency, and what we did in terms of election contest and the Supreme Court of Election. The education. Education has this perspective where education is so important, not only to those who are younger, but also to the oldest ones. If we consider tools that are used today for content sharing, those who are not used to online reading, they might lack of tools. We believe that media literacy allows tools for people to understand their surrounding world, where they will develop their critical common sense. With that in mind, we developed 5 different fronts. The first one was with the Lupa, which is the content provider. And within that same very perspective, we understand that there is a moral cost to correct a prior error. Sometimes someone shares a fake news and they feel shy to correct that error. Many people do not know how to check a piece of news. There is a recent research conducted by Oxford and Ottawa University where 50% of those who used a search in 3 European countries, they did that for content checking, where people search for other sources of knowledge to verify the truth of that content. We had a first experience for content verification. A second project is, if we just include the young people, we believe that if we have a youngsters-centered focus, we will be setting aside the family members, parents, who also perform a very important role in the use of internet. So with a journalism school from the outskirts, we developed a project where teachers from public schools would develop their media literacy. Not just a teacher look to what media literacy is, but how they created those processes that were more reliable to their communities. A third project was with a open word and the new school. That was a media and literacy program during elections where we add a context to teachers and students how to be more wise during elections and to pay attention at context, sources, statistics, poll data, and so on. We also have been working widely with open word as the media literacy is part of the regular vocabulary. However, not enough material is being produced so far. What is that media literacy considering the Brazilian context? And with the new school, we are trying to produce different and new material. Last year, we had produced our first material thanks to our support, Nova Escola, to get AvaMac. AvaMac is the official website for teachers training.
We shall also launch a new initiative. I'll bring you news soon. But the last thing is the News Lab, which is Google area that works to strengthen quality news. Last year, we trained more than 3,500 journalists throughout Brazil, focusing on fact-checking. We had a collaborative coalition to check news during elections led by NJ, and we had the support of Facebook as well. Marco Tulio, you can invite me for the results one of these days because they are quite impressive. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Ju. Diego, você tem conduzido uma pesquisa.
Diego, is a PhD researcher for the University of Rio de Janeiro, and he has taken a deep dive in the work of the Electoral Court to remove fake news and to watch what is being produced by parties, candidates, and etc. And we know that this election was challenging. There were 25,000 candidates. But the next election, next year, is going to be a lot more complex because it's going to be a lot more pulverized. We have 450,000 candidates, aldermen, mayors, hundreds of municipalities, and etc. So I think the most important is how to define standards and criteria that can be used by the judicial branch for the removal of content, to preserve the freedom of speech, and also to guarantee that the work is conducted. What can you share with us based on your research and the work you have been performing? Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation of being part of this debate. It is such important debate, and I think that we got here to the point that perhaps the most critical, elections and the internet and misinformation. So I'm going to talk about the study that we have been conducting together with Professor Danilo Donedo as a coordinator. And the objective of the study is first to understand the electoral reform of 2017 and understand the position of the internet in the regulation. And also to analyze the applicability and implementation of the electoral reform. We surveyed some data and tried to produce some data. Very briefly, going on to the next slide. Just for you to understand the study. It's a qualitative study with an empirical content, and we have 3 points to analyze the internet in electoral laws, particularly the mini reform of 2017, the laws that changed the elections law of 97, and also Resolution 53/541 of 17. And we want to have information about the role of social blogs, misinformation, and how they acted on elections. The second point is when we start to survey data here, is jurisdiction, some court decisions, some agreements from the Supreme Court that took place. And the third point, we tried to address and seek information on content spreading, if it was authorized after the electoral reform, and we tried to extract some data and understanding of how this is being implemented. So talking about data, I'm talking about the application of data. I'm not talking about the content of the reform and try to understand it in its whole. But with the electoral court agreements that we analyzed, they were those that were specifically about the presidential campaign, elections for president. And basically, they were suits that were filed to contest or challenge content, basically electoral propaganda. And our objective was to try and understand data related to the internet. In this analysis, we found 70 appeals, basically vetting content that was released, not only on the web. In fact, the one that has the most numbers was information that was broadcast on TV. So even quantitatively, we can see how important it is the TV media is. In the internet, there were 23 suits, I'm sorry. Out of the 23, we identified all the contents that were vetoed. In some cases, they were not very clear. We could try and understand by the decisions the amount of content that was being vetoed. But it's very important to identify the URL, especially when you are thinking of removing content. You have to know where this content is coming from. But some decisions do not refer to the URL, but refer to the URL that was mentioned in the petition. There were altogether 36 pieces of content, and we tried to understand what they referred about. Some were allegedly fake. Others, the complaint said that they hurt their honor. If you think of Resolution 2351, it says that freedom of speech can be limited if there is offense to the honor of third parties or the release of fake facts. And there was a third category that was a bit more encompassing, were contents that violate other articles of the electoral law. That is, to have a content being boosted by a private person. That is, a private person, according to the law, cannot pay to spread content. Only the candidates, their collegations, or representatives. One aspect that we identified and that really drew our attention is that in all representations, in all suits where content was vetoed because it was considered fake, it is also considered offensive to honor. So please refer to content that is fake and that it hurts the honor. And then there is also trying to understand what is this content that is fake and offensive. And in the efforts to try to define what misinformation is, last year there was a report that was produced by specialists separating misinformation from content that violates the reputation of people. So in the report does not understand fake news or misinformation as necessarily offensive, a violation to one's honor. And another concern that we had was the grounding of decisions. That is, what is understood as fake content and what content should be removed or considered truly fake. And the TSE parameter has been historically that if you ask for a right of response, for instance, that will be accepted if the non-fake fact does not need further investigation. It has to be evident, patently clear. And then you have decisions say that in the case of misinformation, you should consider just misinformation that is explicitly meant to misinform. It seems to me there is still a bit of a lack of parameter to whether these parameters are really suitable to what is being discussed. Misinformation is a complex, dynamic, multifaceted phenomenon. When we think of what is misinformation, we have 7 types of content. It can be a change of context and the whole fabrication of content. So I think there is a need of having safer parameters to define what it is. And the final point about content spreading, we are thinking of the rendering of account of all presidential candidates. we tried to understand the expenditures they had in spreading content. And when we compare each one of the candidates, we see large disparities. Henrique Meirelles was the candidate that spent the most, almost 3 million, and Jair Bolsonaro, according to his statement, he did not spend 1 cent with that. Now, when we go to a relative analysis, even leaving absolute numbers, it is important to compare expenses between Jair Bolsonaro and João Amoedo. They have similar expenditure, but João Amoedo invested a lot as part of his digital strategy. It was 32% of the whole expenses, and Jair Bolsonaro did not spend a penny. Just to close, because I know my time is almost up, Bolsonaro, throughout the election period, had the most engagement levels on the web. So clearly, we have a difference of digital campaign strategies. One, using the spreading of news or boosting of news, and the other, using WhatsApp messages. So it's important for us to understand the strategies to try to fight misinformation. Because to fight misinformation, you have to fight distribution. Not only to focus on content, but how this content is boosted. And we have a strategy that has to be understood, because if we want to regulate it in the future, we have to know what it is all about. Thank you, Diego. I think you're bringing numbers, elements, information that enables us to a broader debate. But unfortunately, our time is up, and we are certainly going to have more opportunities to discuss further. I would like not to close our panel without the final considerations of each one of our members. And if there is a question that can be asked in a tweet, a very, very concise question, then you are okay for the questions. Otherwise, let's go straight to our final considerations. Alexandre, you start. Well, thank you. I really liked the talks, especially Pablo's, when he was talking about fake news and misinformation as a social phenomenon, but also a political phenomenon, and I agree with that. And I would say, Pablo, that education has a very important role in this process, and mediation as well. Data shows the characteristics of internet users in Brazil, what they do, how they do it, and we see that we still have a huge problem of digital inclusion, not in terms of access, which is more or less settled, but a critical appropriation of information. So in addition to political and social issues that you mentioned, I would say that we do have to worry about education for safe use. And to conclude, Monica said something very interesting about the new initiative of Facebook in terms of having a multi-sector committee to handle information. And I would like to say that last year I was part of an event during the GF in Paris. UNESCO held an event together with Mozilla Foundation, and I took part of a panel talking about AI and algorithms. And this phenomenon is so complex that indeed it requires a multi-sectorial approach. Today in Brazil, we have the internet governance model that is quite successful, and I think these algorithms and platforms will more and more require a broader debate involving several players. So this is the challenge for us to address these issues in the future. Well, first I would like to thank the opportunity. Rodrigo was talking about the different performance. I think that WhatsApp is something that I missed. I think this was an electoral campaign where WhatsApp was used as something completely new. It had been used before in the Colombian referendum, but in Brazil, it had a very important role. I think WhatsApp has a dangerous and double characteristics. It started out as an interpersonal message tool, something to compete with SMS, and it gained mass features and privacy mechanisms. When Snowden denounced personal monitoring programs, it implemented end-to-end cryptography, but in terms of mass communication, it is terrible because it enables misinformation campaigns. And you don't know it is happening because it's not public. You cannot identify the origin of misinformation, and you cannot have the counterpoint. So because privacy is a fundamental human right, it has to be preserved, and we have to preserve privacy, but we have to kill mass media communication of this tool because the communication is very dangerous. And the last thing I would like to highlight is some of the recommendations that we have in this survey that is going on to study and expand studies on the founding of decisions. When we try to find safe parameters that are more suitable to the misinformation phenomenon, to try to understand it better. Because if we want to use the same means that we had before to such a different context, it's not going to be of any use. So I think this is something that we have to consider. And also, because of WhatsApp's central presence in campaign strategies, we have to think and try to understand these campaigns better, how it is being used, and try and regulate and address the distribution and dissemination of fake news. I would like just to thank you once again, to say that we are committed in terms of investments, initiatives, and projects in the areas, and invite CGI to talk to us about the creation of this governance committee. We believe this is a topic that will take time. It is extremely relevant, and this is exactly the multi-sectorial approach we're talking about that is part of CGI and NIC.br. So here's my invitation. I would also like to thank you once again and say that the doors are open for dialogue. This is how we are going to build new bridges and reinforce our commitment. We think that free, open internet, open access. I remember the books of Dan Gilbert. That was completely fascinated by this process of everyone producing knowledge. But today, it is a complex world, so is the internet. But we believe that multi-sectorial actions that can bring information and strengthen quality news will continue to help us building bridges in a constant dialogue with society. Thank you very much. Well, on behalf of CGI and SaferNet Brazil, I would like to thank once again each one of our guests and say that the debate is not closed here. Quite the opposite. It is to be deepened along the year. This is a topic that is going to be in our agenda for some years. Solutions are not simple, they are complex, and in view of complexity, we have to continue talking together. And both SaferNet and CGI have and count on your knowledge and expertise for us to continue the discussion. I go back to the MC so that we can go on with our agenda.